Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Today we're reviewing the Technics SL-1210G turntable. I hope you enjoy it. The Technics SL-1210G, and let me just clarify right up front, the 1210 is the black model, the 1200G is the silver model, so changing the model number to indicate the color is kind of an interesting choice, but there's no functional difference between the two. You just get to choose your aesthetic preference. Anyway, I have the 1210G, and the 1200 and the 1210G are priced in the US at $4,300. That's turntable plus Tonearm, so you can put that in context. I would call this in the pantheon of the high-end audio, I would call this a mid-price turntable. There are turntables that are quite a bit less expensive, under $1,000, and there are turntables that are much more expensive, over $100,000. So you can take that for what it's worth. I think it's kind of a nice price point. You should be able to get a very good turntable for that price, and we'll see when we get to sound quality and some other comments that I have if you do. But let's first say this turntable has been around for about 5 or 6 years. Technics did a redesign of the classic SL-1200 series turntable. This one is built specifically for audiophiles. They have a separate line of somewhat similar looking turntables that's made for the club and disco and rap market. They're actually really dedicated to serving that market well, but they are also very interested in the audiophile market, and this turntable is a pretty much complete redesign. That's what I want to emphasize, of the old SL-1200s to update it to modern technology and to serve the audiophile market well. If you know the SL-1200 series from, maybe if you're old enough, from back in the 1970s, you'll know that these are direct drive turntables. That means the motor shaft is connected to the spindle and the platter sits on a single assembly that includes the motor. That has certain disadvantages and advantages, but the main criticism, because direct drive is a great way to have very tight control over the rotational speed of the platter and the stability of the platter, the main criticism historically that was leveled against direct drive turntables is something called cogging, which is a possible attribute of the motor assembly having windings and magnets, and there are nonlinearities in the way that the windings and the magnets interact. And Technics has essentially said, hey, we're tired of that critique, valid or invalid. We're tired of that critique. We want to take it out of the equation, so we're going to redesign the motor assembly so that cogging is impossible. And so there you go. Cogging is, in theory, completely out of the picture. And of course, cogging was always kind of a theory. Some people claim to be able to hear it, but whenever you hear an audible phenomenon and you trace it back to features or circuit design elements, we all do it. I do it, but we're playing with fire. Anyway, they've designed a motor that where cogging is not a theoretical possibility. So they've kind of eliminated that. They've done a bunch of other redesign things here. You've got relatively heavy in this class platter. It's about 8 pounds. A very complex assembly for the feet, the base, to isolate it from vibrations and to make sure that the package is steady. Let me first say the platter is a multi-layer affair with a brass top. Brass is a very dense metal, so they're putting some mass in the platter assembly. And related to that, what they've given up with the redesign of the motor assembly to eliminate cogging is they have, to some degree, reduced the torque of that motor. But if you're used to belt drive turntables and some of the turntables that have super tiny motors, this is actually a pretty torquey assembly. It starts right up. You have adjustability of that, but it starts right up. I can't see it being a problem if you're not a DJ. And this is just not a DJ turntable. Let's just set that aside. The Tonearm is another, I gotta hand it to the Technics people. They are absolutely willing to play with fire because they believe in the approach that they're taking. It's an S-shaped Tonearm made of magnesium, and it is, I would call it a medium mass Tonearm. Technics has a complete white paper looking at the mass of the Tonearm with real cartridges and how it affects the resonant frequency of the Tonearm cartridge combination, and they have gone through some pains to try to optimize that. In addition, and again, pros and cons, engineering is trade-offs. This Tonearm has a removable head shell, and as such, you can change head shells. The one they ship with the turntable is quite lightweight. You can change to a higher mass head shell if that happens to suit the compliance of the cartridge you want to use. Removable head shell is a feature and a bug, I would say. You have another contact point, which, if the system is well designed, should be a relatively minor thing, but it is indeed another contact point. On the other hand, you have interchangeable head shells, which has a lot of convenience advantages. I'll riff on that in a moment. So, in summary, it's a complete redesign of the SL-1200 series in an endeavor to optimize the basic concept here for the audiophile market. I think Michael Fremer, when he reviewed this turntable, made an interesting point, which is that there are some parts being reused from prior generation. Very few, but some parts, and there's a whole concept here that is being optimized. And you probably couldn't build a turntable of this quality and technology level at this price point if you had started from scratch and if you weren't Technics, Panasonic, with a kind of built-in high-volume market for distribution and delivery of turntables. So, for what it's worth, because sound quality is the acid test, but for what it's worth, you're getting a very well-researched, very high quality of manufacturing turntable here at what I think is a pretty reasonable price for what's on offer. All right, let me come back in a minute and talk about setup and some of the virtues and vices of the setup of the SL-1210G, and then we'll go on and talk about sound quality. I come from a particular perspective which you may not share. And I want to get that out there because the following comments kind of come from the perspective that I've got. And, like just about everything in life, these things are debatable. Okay, the theory I would offer you is that the phono cartridge is the most error-prone element of the entire turntable system. Yes, everything matters. Marginal gains, small differences are musically important. I'm not arguing against any of that. I'm saying that in the system, the differences cartridge to cartridge are vastly larger than the differences that come turntable to turntable or tonearm to tonearm. I'm not even going to talk about phono preamps, but in some cases, phono preamp to phono preamp. What that means to me is that a part of the joy and part of the approach that I take to analog is that I like to have a number of cartridges available that I can use, partially to change it up, partially because I think there are certain phono cartridges that work especially well with certain kinds of music and certain discs. So what I'm really getting to here is the interchangeable head shell element of the Technics turntables. I think it's not a minor thing. You may disagree. It may bug the heck out of you that there's this little collar that you stick the head shell into and you tighten it down, and it's just not as solid mechanically as you would have if the entire Tonearm head shell combination were built out of one piece of, carbon fiber, let's say. There's certainly an argument there, but I will show you this. We'll put a screenshot of this up if I can take a good photograph. This is one of my favorite phono cartridges, and it's got plus or minus 3 dB swing in frequency response across the range. That is typical. My point isn't about this phono cartridge. My point is you're going to see variations like that with just about any phono cartridge that you measure. That is, and that's just one measurement. That is a bigger variation than I think you're going to see if you take the same phono cartridge and put it in 5 turntables. I want to take advantage of those differences. Sometimes you get a measurement and you think the measurement is wrong, and then you listen and you're like, wow, that's certainly the case here. You listen and you're like, I love this cartridge on this particular music. It just works. And these kind of variations in phono cartridges are vastly less than what you find when you do measurements of speakers in rooms. So who's kidding whom on, and I'm just talking about a single measurement of frequency response. There are many other measurements that are possible. So I want to be able to change cartridges, use cartridges at will, and that is made radically easier by having a detachable head shell. I want to add to that, my other point about this is, at this price point, if you started building turntables that had multiple tone arms, you would be spending a heck of a lot more money every time you want to use a different cartridge if you had to use a different tone arm. And at some point, you're limited to 2 cartridges. And again, you might be a 1 cartridge kind of person, but if you like to have multiple cartridges, you're very quickly going to get to having 2, 3, 4. I'm currently running 6 cartridges, and I love it. So detachable head shell in my mind is 90% feature, 10% bug. In addition, let's talk about setup, because that was the second virtue of this turntable that there are other turntables that do what I'm talking about. But let me start with, by having a detachable head shell, as I alluded to before, you can to some degree dial in the resonant frequency and the total mass of the Tonearm with cartridge system. Depending on the weight of the cartridge and the compliance of the cartridge, you can use different head shells to dial things in. I will add another point that I happen to love about removable head shells is I think it's much easier to do the adjustments and much less nerve-wracking to do the setup adjustments on the cartridge with a removable head shell. You can get the head shell out, invert it, make small adjustments, hold it in place without feeling like you're torquing or otherwise messing up the bearings on the Tonearm, and down there working with the stylus assembly right next to the platter, and it's just a handy kind of thing. You may disagree with me, and if you disagree with me, then again, it's not a virtue, but I want to point out that there are a number of virtues to having a removable head shell. That comes from the perspective, by the way, of cartridge setup being very important to ultimate sonic quality, which is doubled down by the fact that the manufacturing of cartridges is very hard and not perfect. Let's just take one example, which is zenith angle. So the orientation, if you looked at the cartridge from the top, the orientation of the stylus in that, the plane of the record, in theory, the stylus would be perpendicular to the cantilever, but no manufacturing process is perfect, especially at the tiny dimensions that we're talking about with cantilevers and styli, on top of which this is generally done by hand, and you're going to have sample-to-sample variation. All right, we put all of that together. You've got to be able to adjust zenith angle. You've got to be able to adjust VTA. There are arguments about the meaning of and significance of VTA, but there you have it. You've got to be able to adjust overhang and pick the alignment that you want to use. All of these things on the SL-1210G I thought were very easily done. The VTA adjustment is a knurled knob at the base of the Tonearm that can be run in. I thought it was very easy to do by hand, and I could do it while I was playing my test disc and see the impact on the computer screen of the output. So if you want a turntable that's easy to use from a setup standpoint, and I think you do because setup is really important and because every cartridge differs, again, you've kind of got a winner here. I'm not saying that this is the easiest turntable to use. I think there are a couple right now that allow you to do VTA remotely and audibly, which is kind of a cool thing. The measurement system I use kind of obviates the need for that, but I mean, listening is the final test. So there are some really cool adjustment systems that are on the market now, and this isn't in that category. But basically, this is an easy to set up turntable that I thought was really nicely done. I'll add one final thing. There are a number of counterweights offered with this turntable, again, to deal with different mass cartridges and be able to control the total mass of the system. Also, you have, to a degree, I'm not sure I can figure out like what I should be doing here, but in theory, you can control polar moment of inertia by choosing the counterweight that you use with certain cartridges. So again, it's a pretty adjustable system if that's what you like to do. All right, I'll be back in a minute to talk about sound quality because, that's sort of the ultimate thing here. Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks, and now back to the show. Sound quality with turntables is a tricky business. So let me just admit this right up front, and not to cast aspersions on anything I'm about to say, but this is slippery territory. Those of you, not me, who are, in the, hey, well, why don't you just do a double-blind listening test? If you think about it for about 10 seconds, I think you'll realize that kind of approach is essentially impossible with turntables. But the bigger thing is that when you're testing a turntable, you are inherently testing a system. You're looking at the turntable itself, the Tonearm, the cartridge, and the setup of that cartridge, and it's not at all easy to compare that to another turntable. Fortunately, this is the Absolute Sound and Hi-Fi Plus, and our reference for this sort of thing is the sound of live music, so I'll talk about that, not to confuse you, but that's how we do things here. But I'm going to make comments as if they are attributable to the turntable Tonearm on review here, when I don't 100% know that that's actually what I was listening to, or perhaps some interaction between the turntable and the various cartridges I tried. Okay, enough caveats. This is a very good sounding turntable, as far as I can tell. My first measure of that to a degree is what I'm going to call the analog test. The differentiation and the excellence of analog, when analog is excellent, comes through loud and clear with this turntable. It does the analog thing. There are other turntables, and there are turntables at lower price points that also, I believe, do the analog thing. So that's not that exceptional, but boy, that is a litmus test of turntables in a way, because if you can't deliver that, I'm going to call it analog magic, then what are we really talking about here? We should be listening to digital, which can do very nice things too. Okay, so that was test number 1 that I used. Test number 2 that I used for the general excellence of the SL-1210G was that I could immediately hear differences between the various cartridges that I tried, and it made those stand out in stark relief. That's part of why I'm relatively confident that, cartridges are the difference maker here, but you want a turntable that reveals those differences, because it's not just a matter of bad and good, it's a matter of what is the excellence of this cartridge versus what is the excellence of that cartridge. And just like you want the analog magic to be revealed, you want the differences in the cartridges to be revealed, I think. Again, your orientation may be somewhat different. So the SL-1210G did a good job of revealing the differences between cartridges. I really enjoyed that. And maybe that's a reviewer point of view, but I think those of you who are multi-cartridge users will understand what I'm talking about. The third thing that I liked about the SL-1210G is it is a good performer on dynamics. Now, I want to say that happens to be something that's important to me. The PPPP to FFFF, the low-level sounds to high-level sounds, dynamic contrast, and what I sometimes call dynamic transparency, the revealing of the dynamics that are there, is an essential part of music in my view, and the SL-1210G does a nice job of showing off what the cartridge can do in that domain, and I think that's because it's a very stable platform. Related to that is that the SL-1210G allows you to get speed right, and I felt like it was just a very stable platform for musical delivery. This is almost a subconscious thing in my view, but it really delivered on that front. Now, I will say, when I compared it to my higher end reference rig, which is about a $25,000 turntable Tonearm combination, I felt in that dynamic plus stable platform realm in that, wow, there's just the cartridge and the music just sings from a black background, low noise, no variation. I felt that my reference turntable was even better at that, but comparing the SL-1210G to lower priced turntables, the SL-1210G had the same advantage as the reference rig over those lesser turntables. So I think that's a dimension on which turntables themselves may vary to some degree. There's a final point which it's very hard to be sure this is the turntable, but I will say that I felt that at lower treble frequencies and above, the SL-1210G might be a little edge enhanced or bright. Wow, I'm talking about something that, like with speakers, is really noticeable, and this is almost subliminal. This is at the other end of the spectrum. And it could be that the stable platform of the SL-1210G is just revealing what the cartridge is doing. So boy, there's a judgment call to be made there. And I will add, I find that many components that are excellent at dynamics tend to have this feature of being excellent at dynamics at high frequencies, and it may just be that I'm not fully accustomed to that revelatory capability at high frequencies. But my real point here is, if you're into analog and you're into cartridges that tend to be on the warm and soft side, this turntable, well, it could be complementary, who knows, but it might not be, your jam. But you should go listen to it to figure that out. I also did try the SL-1210G with different head shells. In addition to the one that comes with it, I used the Korf ceramic head shell, and I thought that with moving coils that I tried it with, did a very nice job. So that my point is the turntable is capable of revealing some subtle differences between head shells. Is that the head shell itself, or is that just the fact that the Corf is higher mass and I was dialing in the total mass of the system? You know, as I say, you got to be cautious about these things. I switched from the mat supplied by Technics to a Stein Music Perfect Interface mat. I also thought that took that stability thing that I hear with the turntable anyway and took it up one little click. So I enjoyed that. But I don't feel like those changes, which aren't that expensive but aren't free either, I didn't feel like they were 100% necessary. And some people talk about these things like, oh, it's transformational and you just have to do it. And I'm not really in that camp. I think it's a nice to have if you want to, polish the edges. I tried a lightweight record, not even a clamp, just a record weight, and I don't know that I could tell you that there was a sonic difference there. You're not changing the rotating mass of the system enough for that to be believably appreciable. I just like the fact that it helps you flatten out slightly dished records, which it seems to me is just a better thing from the dynamic motion of the Tonearm cartridge system. The balance of the Tonearm that's supplied by Technics means that small change in vertical tracking angle isn't going to change tracking force, but still a moving system that's going up and down is relying on some amount of damping in the cantilever system, and it can't be better to have more warpage. For some strange reason, a lot of the records I have are relatively flat, and I've had them for many of them for 40 years, so who knows what I did right. But anyway, so I can't comment on whether the record weight really changes the sound of the system, but it makes me more comfortable, so I did it. I am not clear that Technics really wants that mass on there, which is why I went with a low weight system. Maybe there are alternatives, but this equipment is on loan, so you don't want to break it. Anyway, there you have it. I think this is a very nice turntable with a quality level that is impressive when you look at the machining and the underlying feature set. I particularly like this turntable for its combination of flexibility in setup to get setup right, combined with the stable sounding platform that I really felt helped reveal what cartridges do and don't do. If my approach is different from yours, you want to factor that in. So I'm not telling you to, everyone in the world should run out and buy this turntable. There are a lot of good alternatives roughly in this price range, but for my sensibilities, it really worked, and I am relatively confident that at this kind of price point, you would quite enjoy the Technics SL-1210G. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, we would really appreciate it, and you would benefit, my view, if you would click the notification button or bell and click the subscribe button. If you subscribe, it helps other people to find the show. It also helps you to find the show, so win-win-win. Also, I would remind you that we have a weekly newsletter, and so we'll put the subscription links in the show notes. And of course, we publish magazines which have some of our most interesting and detailed reviews in them, and I think you would enjoy reading it if you like magazines. They're available in print or digital format, so we'll put a subscription link in there too. Thank you for watching. I hope you'll come back for the next episode of these reviews, and also check in on our show reports, interviews, history of audio series, all of the things we've got going on here on YouTube. Thanks for watching.